Last summer, I harvested over 240 tomatoes from just 6 plants in my backyard, and every single one of those plants was lush and green and loaded with fruit from July all the way through the first frost. And the reason I mention that is because for years and years, I had the exact opposite problem. My tomato plants would grow 4, 5, or even 6 feet tall with absolutely gorgeous foliage, thick stems, and dark green leaves, but almost no tomatoes. I would be out there watering, fertilizing, and doing everything I thought I was supposed to do, while my neighbor with half the effort would have plants dripping with fruit while mine looked like ornamental shrubs. Then about 5 seasons ago, I started digging into the actual science of what triggers a tomato plant to shift from vegetative growth into reproductive mode. I came across research from the University of Florida Extension and some fascinating work out of Cornell, and what I found completely reset how I think about feeding, pruning, and managing tomato plants. It turns out the fix is not complicated at all once you understand the biology behind it. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly why your tomato plants are producing all leaves and no fruit, and more importantly, the specific changes you can make this season to fix it. We will cover the real science of what controls flowering and fruit set, the feeding adjustments that make the biggest difference, the pruning technique that redirects your plant's energy, and how your watering habits might be working against you. And stay with me until the end, because I will share a simple foliar application trick using common Epsom salt that I stumbled onto almost by accident, and it consistently improves my fruit set by what I estimate is around 20 to 30%. It is one of those things I wish someone had told me a decade ago. So let me walk you through exactly how to turn those beautiful leafy plants into actual fruit producers. Now, before I get into the science and the steps, I want to be honest with you. I spent the better part of 15 years making every single mistake I'm about to describe. When my plants were not fruiting, my instinct was to give them more fertilizer. More food means more growth means more fruit, right? That is what I thought. And when I saw all that lush green growth, I actually felt good about it. I thought I was doing something right. I was not. If you have been dumping a balanced or nitrogen-heavy fertilizer on your tomatoes every couple of weeks and wondering why you're getting enormous plants with barely any fruit, you are not alone. I was right there with you, and I can tell you that the moment I stopped treating my tomato plants like they needed more of everything and started understanding what they actually needed at each stage of growth, that is when everything changed. I started experimenting with different fertilizer ratios, different pruning approaches, and different watering schedules. And within one season, I saw results that honestly made me a little frustrated with myself for not figuring it out sooner. Here is the core concept that changed everything for me. And once you understand it, every piece of advice I'm about to give you will make perfect sense. Tomato plants have two competing biological drives. The first is vegetative growth, which means producing leaves, stems, and roots. The second is reproductive growth, which means producing flowers, fruit, and seeds. These two drives are largely controlled by the balance of nutrients available to the plant, particularly the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus and potassium. When nitrogen is abundant relative to phosphorus and potassium, the plant gets a chemical signal that essentially says, conditions are great, keep growing, get bigger, there is no urgency to reproduce. The plant stays in what you might think of as teenager mode. It is just growing and not thinking about the next generation. But when the nutrient balance shifts, when phosphorus and potassium become more prominent relative to nitrogen, the plant receives a different signal. That signal says it is time to flower. It is time to set fruit. It is time to reproduce. Research from North Carolina State University confirms that excessive nitrogen is one of the most common causes of poor fruit set in home garden tomatoes. This is not abstract theory. This is basic plant physiology, and once I understood it, I could actually see it playing out in my garden in real time. So let me show you the specific adjustments that make this work. The first thing you need to address, and honestly, this is where the biggest gains come from, is your fertilizer program. Here is what most gardeners do, and I know because I did it myself for years. They buy a general-purpose fertilizer, something like a 10-10-10 or 20-20-20, and they apply it on a regular schedule throughout the entire growing season. The problem is that a balanced fertilizer with equal parts nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or worse, a high nitrogen fertilizer, keeps pushing that vegetative growth signal all season long. Your plant never gets the chemical nudge to shift into fruit production mode. Here is what I do instead. For the first 3 to 4 weeks after transplanting, I do use a balanced fertilizer, something around a 10-10-10, because at that stage, I actually want the plant to establish a strong root system and build a healthy framework of leaves and stems. That vegetative growth is important early on. You need a strong plant to support heavy fruit production later. But once I see the first flower clusters forming, and you will know because you will see small, yellow star-shaped flowers appearing at the nodes along the stem, that is when I make the switch. I move to a fertilizer with a lower first number and higher second and third numbers. Something like a 5-10-10 or a 4-8-8 works beautifully. You can find tomato-specific fertilizers at most garden centers that follow this pattern. The one I have used most consistently is a granular organic tomato fertilizer with a ratio of 3-4-6. I apply about 2 tablespoons per plant every 2 to 3 weeks, work it gently into the top inch of soil around the base, then water it in. The difference this made in my garden was dramatic. Within about 2 weeks of making the switch that first season, my plants went from producing scattered flowers to setting clusters of 4, 5, and 6 fruits at nearly every node. It was like flipping a switch, and biologically speaking, that is essentially what was happening. Now let me show you the second adjustment, and this is where a lot of gardeners push back at first, but I promise you the science is solid. You need to be pruning your indeterminate tomato plants, and you need to be doing it correctly. If you are growing indeterminate varieties, which are the ones that keep growing taller all season, like Better Boy, Cherokee Purple, Brandywine, or Sun Gold, those plants will produce what are called suckers. A sucker is a new shoot that emerges from the joint between the main stem and a leaf branch. If you look at your plant right now, go find a spot where a branch meets the main stem and look right in that crook. If there is a small shoot growing at a 45-degree angle, that is a sucker. Left alone, each sucker becomes essentially a new main stem with its own branches, its own suckers, and its own demand for energy. The conventional approach is to let the plant grow naturally and figure it out on its own. What I have found works dramatically better is removing most of those suckers, particularly below the first fruit cluster. Here is why. Every sucker your plant feeds is energy that could be going toward fruit production. A single unpruned indeterminate tomato plant can easily produce 60 to 80 growing tips by midsummer, and every one of those tips is pulling water, nutrients, and photosynthetic energy away from fruit development. What I do is remove all suckers below the first flower cluster completely. Above that, I allow 1 or 2 suckers to develop into secondary stems, which gives me a 2 or 3 stem plant. I pinch the suckers when they are about 2 to 3 inches long, just grasping them between my thumb and forefinger and snapping them off cleanly. Do this in the morning when the plant is turgid and the stems snap cleanly. If you wait until they are 6 or 8 inches long, you are removing growth the plant has already invested significant energy into, and you create a larger wound that is more susceptible to disease. One important note here: if you are growing determinate varieties like Roma, Celebrity, or Rutgers, do not prune the suckers. Determinate tomatoes have a genetically preset size, and removing suckers from a determinate plant actually reduces your yield. This advice applies specifically to indeterminate types. If you are not sure which type you have, check the tag that came with the plant or look up the variety name. It matters. The third adjustment is one that surprises a lot of people, and it has to do with watering. Here is the pattern I see over and over. Gardeners water their tomatoes a little bit every single day, sometimes even twice a day in hot weather. It feels like the right thing to do. The soil surface is dry. The plant looks a little wilted in the afternoon heat. So out comes the hose. But here is what is actually happening beneath the surface. Frequent shallow watering keeps the top few inches of soil constantly moist, which encourages the roots to stay near the surface rather than growing deep. More importantly for our purposes, a tomato plant that is never even mildly stressed has no biological incentive to reproduce. Remember, fruit production is fundamentally a survival strategy. The plant produces fruit to create seeds to ensure the next generation. A plant that is perfectly comfortable all the time has less urgency to do that. Now, I am not telling you to let your plants wilt and suffer. That will cause blossom drop and other problems. What I'm saying is that switching to deeper, less frequent watering produces better results for fruit set. Here is exactly what I do. I water my tomato plants deeply, about 1 to 1 and 1 or 2 inches of water per week, delivered in 1 or 2 sessions rather than 7. I run a soaker hose at the base of my plants for about 30 to 45 minutes twice a week. This pushes water down 8 to 12 inches into the soil, which encourages deep root growth and creates a slight dry down period between waterings that nudges the plant toward reproductive mode. If you're in zones 8 through 10, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 95 degrees Celsius, you may need to water 3 times per week, but the principle stays the same. Deep and infrequent beats shallow and constant every time. You can check your soil moisture by pushing your finger about 3 inches into the soil near the base of the plant. If it feels dry at that depth, it is time to water. If it still feels cool and slightly damp, you can wait another day. The fourth adjustment involves temperature awareness, and this is one that too many gardeners overlook entirely. Tomato flowers will not set fruit properly when nighttime temperatures stay above 75 degrees or when daytime temperatures consistently exceed 90 degrees. The pollen becomes sticky and non-viable at those temperatures. This is pure plant physiology, and there is not much you can do to change the weather, but you can work with it. If you're in zones 7 through 9 and you experience stretches of extreme heat in July and August, here is what I have learned. First, do not panic when fruit set drops during heat waves. The plant is not dying, it is just waiting. Second, you can improve your odds by providing light afternoon shade using a simple shade cloth rated at 30 to 40%. I drape mine over a basic frame made from 1 2-inch PVC conduit, and it drops the temperature around the plants by about 5 to 8 degrees. That can be enough to keep pollen viable. Third, plant your tomatoes early enough that they have time to set a heavy first crop before the worst heat arrives. In zones 7 and 8, I aim to transplant about 2 to 3 weeks after my last frost date, which gives the plants a solid 6 to 8 weeks of good fruiting weather before the real heat of summer kicks in. In zones 3 through 5, your growing season is shorter, but your heat stress window is also smaller, so this is less of an issue. Focus on choosing varieties with shorter days to maturity, something in the 60 to 70 day range, like Early Girl or Stupus. Now let me cover a few common mistakes I see that tie all of this together, because sometimes it is not about what you are doing wrong with any single practice. It is about a pattern. The first pattern is what I call the kindness trap. Gardeners who love their plants tend to overdo everything. Too much fertilizer, too much water, too much attention. And I did this myself for years. The plant responds to all that abundance by growing like crazy, which looks like success, but is actually the plant saying, I have everything I need, no reason to reproduce. The fix is deliberate moderation. Pull back on nitrogen after flowering begins, water deeply but less often, and resist the urge to do something every single day. The second pattern is ignoring the calendar. Timing matters enormously with tomatoes. If you transplant too late, the plants are trying to establish themselves during peak heat, and they end up spending their prime fruiting window just trying to survive. If you fertilize with high nitrogen in midsummer, you are pushing vegetative growth exactly when you want the plant focused on ripening the fruit it has already set. I keep a simple garden calendar now where I note my transplant date, the date I switch fertilizers, and my expected first harvest window. It takes 5 minutes and it keeps me on track all season. The third pattern is neglecting what is happening below the plant. All those lower leaves and suckers that are touching the soil or growing in heavy shade are not contributing meaningfully to fruit production. They are using energy, restricting airflow, and creating conditions for fungal disease. I remove all foliage below the first fruit cluster once the plant is well established, usually about 4 to 5 weeks after transplanting. This improves air circulation around the base, reduces splash-borne disease, and redirects energy upward toward fruit production. Now here is the bonus tip I promised you at the beginning, and this is something I stumbled onto about 3 seasons ago when I was researching magnesium deficiency in tomatoes. Epsom salt, which is just magnesium sulfate, can meaningfully improve fruit set when applied as a foliar spray during the flowering period. Magnesium is a central component of chlorophyll, and it plays a critical role in the plant's ability to move phosphorus, which, as we discussed, is the key nutrient for fruit production, from the roots to the flowers and developing fruit. Here is my exact method. I dissolve 1 tablespoon of plain Epsom salt, no fragrances, no additives, in 1 gallon of warm water and stir until it is completely dissolved. Then I spray it onto the foliage and flowers using a simple pump sprayer, making sure to coat both the tops and undersides of the leaves. I do this once every 2 weeks, starting when I see the first flower clusters open, and I spray in the early morning before the sun is intense so the solution has time to absorb before it evaporates. I want to be straight with you. This is not going to fix a major nitrogen imbalance or make up for poor pruning practices. But as a supplemental practice on top of everything else I have described today, I consistently see more flowers setting fruit and fewer flowers dropping. Research from the University of Vermont Extension supports that magnesium supplementation can improve fruit quality and yield in soils where magnesium is not abundant, which describes a lot of home garden soil, especially in the eastern United States. So if you have been struggling with beautiful tomato plants that just will not produce fruit, I hope today gave you a clear picture of not just what to do differently, but why it works. The shift from vegetative growth to fruit production is not mysterious. It comes down to nutrient balance, smart pruning, proper watering, and understanding what your plant is trying to do at each stage of its life. Those 6 plants that gave me over 240 tomatoes last summer were not special genetics or lucky soil. They were the result of understanding the biology and working with it instead of against it. You can get the same results, and I think you will be genuinely surprised at the difference one season of intentional adjustments can make. Good luck out there and happy growing. If this breakdown of the science behind a massive tomato harvest has changed the way you look at your garden, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. We are digging deep into the biological secrets that the big corporations don't want you to know. Let's grow a better future together. The next garden treasure will be unearthed very soon.